Okay, so we're going to get started. And this is actually, when I heard we were doing this webinar today, I thought it would actually be not something that people would be that interested in, but it's actually a very important topic. And I realized the reason that I put this together quite a while ago. And it's because what happens to a lot of attorneys is they end up disqualifying themselves for lots of jobs when they could get the position and they don't realize that they could. So it happens with partners, it happens with associates, it happens with all sorts of people that don't get positions because they pay a lot of attention to the experience in a job posting or any job that they're seeing online, whether it's through a recruiter or otherwise. And at BCG, when we make placements, the majority of placements, more than 50%, are for attorneys that don't actually match a certain experience level. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. But if the majority of our placements are with attorneys that don't match experience levels, then that should show you that taking that into account isn't always the smartest thing for you to do. So let me go here. And again, most of the placements that we make, the experience level doesn't matter. There's a lot of rules that go along with this. And so you should be aware of the rules and how you can get positions with firms outside of those experience levels. And I'll go into those a little bit today. And one thing that I've noticed happens a lot is when we work with candidates, we send them positions to either approve or to reject. And a lot of times when they get positions that don't match their experience level, not only will they reject them, but they'll reject BCG thinking that we don't know what we're doing, which is a pretty funny thing. People oftentimes believe that for sending the wrong types of jobs, that we're doing something wrong, and they're afraid of that, and people get scared away. And we actually send these openings precisely because we know what we're doing. And again, you have to ask yourself, why are law firms asking for one level of experience and then hiring people outside that level of experience? So I'm going to give this presentation right now, and it's not a long presentation. Last week we did the resume reviews, and I think that went on for, quite a long time, like 3.5 hours, and most everybody stayed around for the whole webinar, which I was very surprised, even after we reviewed resumes. And then, so today we'll have a lot of time for questions. If you have any questions that you're thinking about involving anything to do with your career, I'm happy to answer them and have a lot of time to do so today because this won't be that long of a webinar compared to the other ones we've done in the past. So this first one is law firms, when they make hiring decisions, they're actually making business decisions. And those business decisions mean that they're not always spending as much time thinking about the experience level as you might be. So if a law firm only has one opening, and they're going out and making others aware that they have an opening, that means they have a business need. And a business need needs that they have work from a client that's usually not getting done, especially at the associate and even the senior associate and partner level. So the work's not getting done. They're losing money by not having anybody doing the work. And the law firm often will risk losing clients or work if they don't have attorneys to help them. Every opening that a firm has, when they're advertising it, it's like a real need. They've decided that they have the work, that they need people to do it, and the work's not getting done without you there. And just imagine if you're billing out at $500 an hour, hypothetically, that means they could be losing $20,000 or more a week. Not only that, but they are probably creating relationship problems with their clients. They may take the work elsewhere. So imagine if you were a law firm and someone left, it was a real estate associate billing 2,000 hours a year, and there's only one real estate partner in your firm. This partner is going to be very upset because all of a sudden he's going to be doing or she's going to be doing the type of work that they don't want to do, things that associates do that the partners typically don't want to do, and things that partners don't want to bill their clients high billable hour rates to do. So they'll say, I prefer a fifth year when they're asked who they need to hire. So HR may come to them and tell them, who do you want? And they'll say, I want a fifth year. But again, the clients are upset because the work's not getting done. The partner risks losing business and also losing the client. And the partner will be complaining to the HR people in the firm, or the partner may be his own firm or her own firm, but at the same time, they're upset. And the only applicants they may have received with 5 years of experience may have been doing unsophisticated work, or they may have bad attitudes, and the partner that needs the work done may not like them. And so they may say there's no one that fits the bill. Now, all of this can be determined by different geographic areas too. So I want to just talk a little bit about that. What happens in major cities like New York and Los Angeles, they can often find that type of person. But in smaller markets, it's much less difficult. And in contrast, this partner may have a few excellent candidates who can do the work you need or are close, but only have 2 years of experience, but they're at a similar law firm. And then another might have 9 years of experience. So you have to ask yourself, if they don't have the right people, but they're losing money every day, and they find some people that they like that don't have the exact amount of experience, what would you do? In contrast, if you have a few excellent candidates, but they don't have enough experience, and another has 9 years of experience, what would you do? If you need someone to do the work and you're losing thousands of dollars every day and you risk losing your clients. And so most law firms in this situation do not sit around waiting for the perfect applicant with a perfect amount of work experience. And again, it could be 4 to 6 years, and you might have 3, or it might have 2. It could be, or you might have 8. And law firms are not, if they like you and they like your experience, they're not going to wait for the perfect applicant. Instead, they're going to hire outside of their class year requirements. And they do this all the time. The majority of our placements are not in the sweet spot of what the law firm is looking for. They're a little bit inside or a little bit outside of it. And law firms always figure out a way to make an exception. They'll look at the people that they have that match perfectly what they're seeking, but then they'll also look outside of it. What I'm going to talk about today is how the openings for attorney jobs fall into different experience level, and how there's flexibility within these, what I call buckets. And a bucket would be a range that the law firm needs people to work in. Again, if you apply outside of these buckets that I'm going to talk about, then you're going to be very unlikely to get a job. But if your experience level falls within these buckets for the jobs you're applying for, you can be hired even if you don't have the exact level of experience. I'm going to talk about starting with recent law school graduates, and then I'm going to go all the way up to partners with business, and that's what these buckets are. So, when the law firm's looking for someone with recent law school graduate with no experience, which I see these openings all the time. There's openings for first-year associates, people graduating from law school. And what this means is the law firm is prepared to train you. They want to basically indoctrinate you into their culture, clients, and their ways of practicing law, with a hope that you will stick around for the rest of your career if you do a good job. And these firms are prepared to, and it's a big deal when a law firm brings in a new person, by the way, because they're taking a big risk. They're spending extra time training you. They're losing a lot of money because they're writing your work off, but they're prepared to do that. And if a law firm has one of these openings, it's likely not that flexible. I want someone that's new. I want someone that can train. I want someone, someone like that. And these type of jobs, when you see them, those are very good if you're coming out of law school. And that's the whole purpose of summer associate programs, to get people to those jobs. And the reason for those a lot of times is the law firm may have not hired enough people through summer programs and people have left. The law firm may suddenly have a lot of work that it wants junior associates to do. And so that's basically what's happening. And when a law firm's hiring a junior associate with no work, there's a lot of reasons, or no work experience, that they may be doing that. A ton of reasons, actually. But one of the main reasons is that they want new people that they can train in their way of doing work. And they want to start someone out where they're not as expensive in terms of their billable rate to the clients, and also that may be, frankly, willing to do all sorts of busy work that the more senior associates don't want to do. So the next bucket is entry-level attorneys with less than 1 year of experience. So what that means, sometimes law firms will hire people with less than 1 year of experience. Not often. It's very rare. We typically, BCG, when someone has been practicing for at least 6 months, we'll start looking at them for jobs, and law firms may be interested in them if there's a good enough reason for the person looking for a position that early in their career. And if a law firm is looking for someone with less than 1 year of experience, they're not likely to be too flexible. So that's what they want. They're likely to have, again, lots of grunt work that they can't charge clients higher billable rates for, or may have an opening because someone in their associate class left. Sometimes the reason for these openings are because people may have not passed the bar, or people just left that were new. And so they want to bring in people like that. But these kind of openings are fairly rare. When you start your first job in a law firm, you're expected to be there a minimum of 1 year. And typically, I would recommend to anybody that's a new lawyer that you do your best to stay there up 3 to 5 years. A lot of people will leave after their second year, but getting trained, and if you want to move up in terms of the prestige level, then you certainly should move earlier in your career. But at the same time, it does take a while to get trained. So the next one, and it's better many times to stay as long as you can at a new firm. The next one are junior attorneys with 1 to 3 years of experience. The more experience you have, the more likely you're going to know what you're doing and not have your hours written off by clients. One of the reasons that attorneys, partners don't always like the most junior attorneys is because you have a lot of questions, you're making a lot of mistakes, you're not as efficient with your time, and they want to do their jobs and not necessarily be bothered with training. And to the extent you're not getting training by mid-level and senior associates, and if it's a small office and someone's coming to you, they may not like that. There are a lot of firms, by the way, to avoid that will only hire laterals, and they won't hire from summer programs or even junior associates. They'll wait till you have a couple of years of experience and know what you're doing before doing anything. And another issue with the most junior associates is even if you're working 2,000 or more hours per year, a lot of those firms will actually write off your time, meaning they may write off 500 hours of the 2,000 hours because they believe your work is inefficient and will look that way to the client as well. So an associate that has 1 to 3 years of experience typically has some idea of what they're doing, and they've had someone else who's trained them, which is good for the firm because when they come in, they're trained and they no longer have to write off as much of their time. It's actually a real bargain for people in law firms to start hiring people with 1 to 3 years of experience. The other benefit you have when you're a junior associate is you can be billed at much lower rates than senior attorneys. And you're also quite hungry and to work, and you think you're going to be able to make partner, and which you may advance, and you get experience. You're trying to impress. You're interested in following orders. You don't have opinions of your own yet. You have stamina, and you can work a long time, and you're enthusiastic about practicing law. Law firms, by the way, once you get 1 to a few years of experience, they love junior associates because what they can do is they can put them on different projects. And instead of the partner billing out at $1,500 an hour, your billing rate might be $300 or $400 sometimes. And so with that lower, or $500, and with that lower billing rate, the law firm is able to look good to their clients. So if you're working a bunch of hours, it doesn't look as threatening as the partner working a bunch of hours, and it's not as expensive. So law firms that are looking for people in this range typically will prefer someone with 2 instead of 1 year of experience, and 3 instead of 2 years of experience. And the reason for that is because the more experience you have, the more trained you are, the more you know what you're doing, the less you bother partners with questions, the more efficient your work is, and the less likely you are to make mistakes and have to do a lot of on-the-job learning. And so when law firms make a business exception for junior attorneys in terms of bringing them in, the business purpose for a 1st to 3rd year associate tends to be similar. So law firms seeking 2 years of experience is maybe willing to hire someone with 1 year of experience or 3 years of experience. And if they're seeking attorneys in this range, they may be ready to hire someone with 9 months of experience and not 1 to 4 years of experience instead of 3. However, the larger the law firm, the less likely they are to be successful and to be flexible. So what that means is the largest law firms, like the largest AM law firms, they will tend to be able to hire people that they want because they'll get a ton of applications. And because they have so many applications, they're less likely to go outside their experience level. But at the same time, if you're a much better candidate in terms of your school and the firm you're coming from, they're often very willing to look outside of that. But the idea is that the 1 to 3 years of experience, they want people that are young, hungry, and enthusiastic. And if a law firm needs someone with no more than 3 years of experience and you have 5 years, then they may ask you to step back in terms of your class year. So that's something the law firms also do. The law firms will come in and they will say, when you're trying to get a position, and if you have 4 or 5 years of experience and they say we only have an opening for a third year, sometimes they knock people back, or they tell them that the firm they're coming from isn't good enough and they think they need more experience. And that's very common. I did want to bring up a point also too that's interesting and it bears mentioning. When I see like older attorneys, a lot of times that become partners and become or senior, like they lose this level of enthusiasm and being as hungry as older attorneys or younger attorneys have. And I think that's a product of aging. It's a product of being new in the profession. It's a product of wanting to impress people. And so as this attorney gets more senior, they lose that. And so that's one of the benefits and why many times it's much easier for a junior attorney to get a position than it is a senior attorney. It's not just about the experience. It's about the drive and the desire to work as hard as possible and a lot of other things. So the mid-level attorneys with 3 to 6 years of experience are probably the most marketable you would be in your entire career. If you are a partner with a lot of business, you will become marketable. But this is the sweet spot where everyone really wants you. And the reason for that, I've already mentioned earlier, is attorneys that are at this level tend to know what they're doing. They're efficient with their time, so they don't go off on goose chases. They're able to get assignments done fairly well. They're probably still relatively hardworking and enthusiastic because they still believe and that depending on the firm they're in, that they can make partner. They're always trying to improve and they're open to suggestions. They've been committed to the profession for a long enough time. They haven't left. They want to improve. They're hungry for recognition. And this is really the point where law firms love you because you are able to do almost any type of work that they give you, which you learn how to do by your third year in most cases, and you're still very enthusiastic. And if you have very good experience, especially in one practice area, like we spoke about not yesterday, but on last week's, we spoke about in last week's call, if you have, when we talked about resumes, if you have experience in one practice area where a law firm can just plug you into something, and it doesn't really matter what that is. It's very interesting. Some of the most marketable attorneys right now are attorneys doing trust and estates, attorneys doing medical malpractice, like all of these practice areas where people are just doing one thing. And practice areas will go with the economy, like real estate's actually very slow right now. But it's very interesting that how marketable mid-levels are if you have experience in one thing. So what I'd like to say to everyone is if you are junior and you're getting experience in 15 different things, you're actually better off probably being a personal injury attorney or just a corporate M&A attorney that's more specialized. Because the idea is when you're a mid-level, if you're very specialized in one thing, the presumption is that you're able to do that very well, and the law firm doesn't need to train you, and you're able to be plugged into something. And this is honestly the best time in your career. Attorneys like this get the most interviews. They have the best odds of getting a job. And again, some law firms will have some flexibility, meaning they could plug you in as a second year, but if they wish a 6th year, they could hire a 7th year, or even if they had a 3rd year, they could hire a 6th year, they could hire a 3rd year. So it's important to understand how this flexibility works, and law firms do have flexibility. And many times they would prefer over a 9th year, for example, they'd probably prefer a 2nd year, which for a lot of reasons that I may have brought up earlier. But again, very easy to get jobs comparatively at this point in time. But the biggest thing that the law firms also like is that the attorney is not going to expect to be made a partner immediately. They're going to work hard for several years. So a lot of times the attorneys are most of the time, as they get closer to partnership, They are more paranoid about making mistakes. They tend to bill more hours, and then they don't require supervision. So they're like these billing machines that can sit there doing a good job and will just bill as much as they can and work as hard as they can. And it's really, from a law firm's perspective, about as good as it gets. So these are the best people to get jobs for, and also the easiest to get positions when you reach that level. But you need to reach that level. And this is just some career advice. If you reach that level, having been at one firm, a good firm, or been at maybe two firms, but kept going up in terms of the prestige level, you're typically in very good shape. If you also are in one practice area and not a generalist, you're in good shape. And again, the practice area doesn't matter. It could be commercial litigation. It could be insurance defense. It doesn't matter. If you are an expert in one thing, then you're going to do much better. One other thing I just wanted to bring up is I review resumes pretty much hours per day. And one of the things that I notice is a lot of people are putting multiple practice areas on the resume. So they'll talk about having done transactions and litigation. And the problem with that is it makes you look like you're not an expert. And law firms want to hire people that are an expert and very committed to one practice area. Because if you say you've been doing 3 different practice areas and you're a mid-level associate, that's almost like being a junior associate, because you're doing your expertise is in 3 different things. So you have to be very careful about this. And I keep bringing it up because when I see resumes like that, there's often nothing I could do with them, because most of the jobs in the market are for one position. It's for people to do one thing. There's very few jobs that say, hey, we're looking for someone that can do real estate transactions and commercial litigation and trademark law. There's just not these. This is not what happens. All the jobs are for people to do one practice area. So your resume, if you're applying to a firm that has a job in a practice area, the smartest thing you can do is drill down and make it about one thing. If you make it about multiple things, you're typically not going to get jobs. And this is just, we talked on the resume call last week about this, and so many people do this. It's just a way to destroy your chances of getting a position. If you come into your mid-level, into being a mid-level associate, and you have experience in one practice area, you're just very marketable. People are interested in you, especially if you're in a good sized market. Now, if there's not a lot of opportunities in your market, that's fine, but you'll have a much better chance of getting them if you have experience in one practice area. So this is the next bucket, which are senior associates. And this means you have 6 to 9 years of experience. It's typically could be, sometimes it's 7 to 9 years or 7 to 10 years. Larger cities, often it's 7 to more years, but 6 to 9 years is the next one. Here, what law firms want is they want law firms that are well-trained in their practice area, that can manage different things, meaning they start wanting them to manage junior associates, mid-level associates. They know what they're doing with very little supervision. They often don't need to even run work by a partner. They can just do it. And law firms still want attorneys, when they hire them at this level, to be very enthusiastic about the opportunity of becoming a partner. But because they're being hired so late in the game, and other people maybe that have been there longer and have more history, it's often much harder for senior associates that are hired like this to become partners. And law firms will often make exceptions at the associate level for attorneys with 6 to 9 years of experience. If they have openings in this range, they're going to have some flexibility. So they will often hire a 4th or 5th year attorney instead of a 6-year, but not that often. What is important to understand about senior level attorneys, when you start getting 6, 7, and 8 years of experience, is that you start becoming competitive in some cases with partners for work, because partners typically, if your billing rate gets closer to partners, so it may be a couple hundred hours different, a couple $100 an hour different from a partner, and in that case, what that means is that the client would prefer to have the partner do the work. And because the partner's name is behind everything, they're supposedly the expert. And so the client doesn't like it. And also, most of the time, partners make more money when they do their own work as opposed to give it to others. A partner at some firms may get 30% of the billables of the work that they do, like the collections, and they may only get 10% of the work that they give others. There's an incentive for them to do work. But the law firm is still, when an attorney is a senior, they're still concerned with getting a lot of committed, inspired work out of you. They want people that can follow directions. They want people that are still very enthusiastic and not jaded and disheartened about advancing the partnership, and they want you to believe that advancement is possible. So this is a really important point. So one of the things that at all levels that a law firm is doing is they want people with a lot of ambition that are channeling that into a law firm. And I had an interesting thing happen. There was a really good law firm in Silicon Valley, a very well respected law firm, and they were interviewing one of my candidates that had this just incredible background. And she had she was a patent litigator, and she had a PhD in electrical engineering from something like Harvard or Caltech, some really incredible background, and then had gone on to go to Stanford Law School, and just an amazing attorney. And she went into the interview and with this great firm and told them that she would prefer not to have to make partner, but she was happy to work there and work hard. And they were just like, no way. They said they had no interest in talking to her any further because they wanted people that were going to go there and try to be partners. And the lesson from that is that law firms, and this is all good law firms, when they're hiring people at a senior level, they want you to start working even harder and be more enthusiastic than you ever were. Because you're getting closer. They want more hours and they want you to do the most work possible. And this is very important for all senior attorneys to understand this. And this, what I'm saying right now, if you are a junior now, it could change your career if you remember it. And if you're senior right now, it could change your career if you remember it. So what tends to happen to attorneys, and I'm sure that you've seen this in firms that you've been in, is there's always these groups that suddenly become very negative on the firm. And the firm knows it because the firm sees the people you're talking to and what you're doing, and they get a sense of it. And they start pushing people out that they feel are negative or not giving them work. And that negativity will carry over into your next job. So you may be able to do a good job of getting a job, but you will often follow with negative people when you get into the next job as well. So law firms want people that are not part of that crew. And they can pick that up, but honestly, it's something that will destroy your career. So you have to spend your time around people that are doing things and will lift you up, and not the opposite of people that will tear you down with bad information. And so as attorneys go through their career, a lot of them, not the ones that stick with it, will not be negative and will keep this enthusiasm going, but a lot of them don't. And again, the majority of them don't. They may find happiness in other practice settings, but a lot of the time they don't. And so this is one of the things that law firms are protecting themselves from as people get more senior. Because if an attorney that's senior looks like there's no chance of that person making partner, they're only going to be there for a few years. And then when they figure out they're not going to make partner, they're suddenly more negative than ever because they've spent their whole careers trying to do that, and now they're very negative. This whole idea of being positive and staying positive is incredibly important. And if you don't do it, it's going to hurt you. A lot of attorneys do it, and most of them do in large firms and in other size firms. So you have to maintain your enthusiasm for this profession. And if you don't, you're going to be treated and relegated to roles you may not like. You'll be unemployed or you'll be underemployed, and you have to stay enthusiastic. You have to believe that you can achieve things. You have to do things and get yourself pumped up and believe that you can succeed. I really don't know how many different ways to say this, but once you stop believing you can succeed, you stop succeeding. This is one of the most important times when you get senior, because at that point, you may have developed all these negative thoughts about a firm or about practicing law, and law firms do not like that, and they will pick up on it. My father was in the CIA when he was younger, and I remember he was saying that he met his handler, and his handler was telling him or questioning him about some person that he was supposed to be friends with or something. And my dad went off and said all this negative stuff about this person. And the handler said to him, don't think it or you will show it. And that's a very good point. When people are thinking negative things about the firm or the practice or wanting to go in house or all these things, then they start showing it. And that ends up hurting their career. So you need to be very careful about not about losing your enthusiasm and staying as enthusiastic as possible. If two associates walk into an office to interview and one is extremely enthusiastic and talking about how much they love their practice area and practicing law and how they're planning this and how they won this, and another person walks in and just acts like it's a job and is professional, but nothing like the person that was enthusiastic. The person that's enthusiastic is always going to get hired. One of the most important pieces of advice I can give to you is you need to keep your enthusiasm up. You need to avoid negative people. If negative people are talking, you need to just get out of there. I remember when I was in high school, and I apologize for going off on these tangents, but when I was in high school, there was this guy that I knew pretty well. And he was a friend of mine. And if you walked up to him and you said something negative, or I hate this class, or I don't like this person did that, he would literally just walk away. He would cut off the conversation and walk away. And I stayed friends with him. I've been friends with him for 30 years. And no, more than that. But he has that characteristic. He just doesn't participate in negative stuff. And he's gone on to be one of the highest paid people in the NFL, not as a football player, but in working for the NFL organization. He's been an Emmy Award-winning producer and all this stuff. And he's what he does that, and frankly, he's not even that. He barely, when I was in high school, barely graduated. He was one of the worst students in the class. He tried really hard, but he just didn't have the intellectual firepower. But he did have that. He had the ability to stay positive and not negative, and to always pick himself up and be enthusiastic. He has great self-talk. He talks to himself and thinks in a way that's not arrogant about how excited he is about this and that. So you need to avoid this negativity. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because when you become a senior attorney, meaning you have more than 6 or 7 years of experience, law firms start becoming less interested in you. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, like I talked about earlier, but a lot of it is because they don't want this negativity, because negativity brings everyone down. And so you need to be positive, and that brings everybody up. And law firms love positive people because at all times, there's people that are getting negative from the work, from the lack of opportunities, for all sorts of things. But the people that succeed are the ones that stay positive. Now, here's the next bucket. And just to give you some perspective, I remember when I was at my first law firm, there was a guy that was billing, 3,500 hours a year, and just completely excited and completely going all out and great attitude. And the law firm made him partner in something that was record time, like 3.5 years. So the more, because they'd never seen so much enthusiasm. And by the time I got to that firm, he'd been there like 10 years and had a huge book of business and was still enthusiastic and still billing those kind of hours. So this enthusiasm is what's going to carry you through and make you successful. And the more you get beaten down by the profession and you allow this negativity to affect you, the worse off you're going to be. And it's all about how you talk to yourself. It's all about how you interpret the world. So the next bucket of people is attorneys with 10 or more years of experience that don't have business. And this is a very common thing, especially in large firms, because how do you possibly have time if you're billing all the time to get work? And law firms at this level that are hiring at this level typically have a lot of senior level work. They need someone to supervise associates. They don't have enough people at the kind of the partner level to do work. Sometimes partners will have these huge books of business I've seen these days of tens of millions of dollars. And because they have such large books of business, they couldn't possibly do the work all on their own. And sometimes they don't want to give the work to other partners because they're worried that those other partners will steal their clients. but they need someone to supervise associates and manage work and all sorts of reasons. Let's just take as an example, a firm seeking someone at that level. The firm is likely to believe that you probably don't have business and you're unlikely to have in the future, but you're able to be managed, meaning you're not someone that thinks you can do everything on your own, and you're going to be dependent on the firm for work. So that's actually not always a negative. And you may not be as motivated and hardworking as people at a lower level, which is unfortunate, but this happens a lot. And there's often very good reasons for hiring people at the seniority level. And the law firm's only going to do so when they have matters that require someone precisely like you, meaning you have that exact type of experience. So all the time I see big law firms in New York and other places hire senior level attorneys that are just very qualified in a practice area. They may do one aspect of corporate law or project finance or something and be very senior and trained at a great firm, and it'd be very hard for them to find someone like you. So an example might be a large law firm has a large client going bankrupt, and they need an attorney to do the work because they don't have anyone that can do these sophisticated type of bankruptcies. The law firm may bring in someone that's senior that can do all the work. And sometimes it may be done in one office, and there may be a bankruptcy attorney in another, but and that's an example. Law firms may also could have a significant client that keeps bringing in patent infringement lawsuits and wants to do them internally, but doesn't have anybody that's an experienced patent litigator. So they would do something like that. Someone that's experienced to do all the work. A law firm might have a lot of technology clients doing private security offerings and may have a different type of capital markets attorney. And so they'll bring in someone to do that and then maybe even supervise associates doing that and then reporting to another partner. So law firms will hire senior attorneys without business for any number of reasons. They'll do so in corporate, trust and estates, patent, prosecution, and other things where they can hire specialists without regard to the business they have. Also, when they have senior attorneys, they can often, with institutional clients, they can often bill them using flat rate things and bring you in for that. And they will make exceptions all the time for attorneys like without business. And if a law firm wants someone with 10 or more years of experience, they would often prefer many times to hire someone with 9 years of experience or a little less if they can, but sometimes they do want 10 plus years of experience. And again, they would prefer 10 years of experience and not 15 or 15 years compared to 30. The reason is and I hate to say this, and it does sound discriminatory, but most law firms prefer younger people that are less set in their ways, that are more enthusiastic, that are just maybe have more energy, have more time to give to the work, all sorts of things. And there's just a bias in all law firms towards people that are hungry, younger, and there's that actually is often sometimes valued more than the quality of your experience. So this is the final bucket, which is attorneys with 10 or more years of experience that have business. This is not something that applies to most people probably on this call, but I will talk about it, and because this is one of the most important things that any attorney can aspire to in their career is to have business. So if a law firm says they want portable business, they mean it. They're very serious about what they're saying. And I've rarely seen a law firm state that they want to hire someone with business that hired someone without business. With business means that the law firm wants you to be able to support yourself and pay your way, and hopefully have money left over to give to other partners that will help the firm grow. So law firms hire people with business because typically they need the money from the attorney's business. They want spin-off work, meaning work that the attorney is doing that other departments can do. So like a corporate attorney, typically they love corporate attorneys, by the way, will often have clients that they're doing all their corporate work for and meeting with. And so those same clients will get into litigation and all sorts of things. And then they can refer things out there. And oftentimes law firms will have holes in their practice group. So they may be missing a certain type of attorney. For example, they may be missing a commercial real estate leasing attorney and have people that can do commercial transactions, but not leases. And there's just all sorts of things. And if a law firm says they want a corporate attorney or with $2 million then they're not interested in someone with no business or even 1 million. They've identified a business need and that they're sticking to it. Law firms will hire attorneys with the hope that they will potential to generate more. Sometimes law firms will just want a minimal amount of business. So they may say, if the law firm wants to pay you $200,000, they may say we want $200,000 in business with the idea that they might be able to help you and generate it. Again, law firms, if you generated a lot of business in the past, may often help you redevelop your book of business, and they may hire you as well. A law firm that wants business is rarely going to deviate from this requirement because they need you to bring in work and typically do not have the work for you. But what's important to understand, it's funny, is every law firm is seeking attorneys that have business. It's pretty much every law firm out there. If you have enough business, they'll be interested in you. And regardless of preference that law firms have of putting your experience into buckets, they're often going to be very flexible with partners. They'll often be very flexible under some conditions. So now this is a very important part of the webinar where I'm going to talk about the flexibility and the firms that have the most flexibility in terms of hiring you outside of those experience levels. And this is also a very good way to tell you some ways that you can get a position that may not be something that you necessarily have thought about. And this is a way that I'm often able to get lots of people positions outside of their the main area that they're trying to, that they're outside of the area or different types of firms that will make exceptions based on experience. This is my favorite part of this webinar. So smaller law firms will have a lot more flexibility in class year and the requirements than larger firms. Larger firms don't have to be as flexible, but smaller law firms often do. Larger law firms have systems. They have a lot of people coming in and trying to apply to the positions, and especially in large cities, and they're much less able to have to make exceptions to those systems. And these systems develop over decades as the law firm gradually discovers what it needs to do to run an effective business, and they allow the business to grow. But in contrast, smaller law firms often stay small because they don't have these same systems or not at a certain growth stage. So what do I mean by that? A larger law firm will develop manuals and procedures, and they'll have HR procedures and things that they follow, knowing that it's not smart for them to bring in senior associates when they need junior associate work. They're just much more organized and they're run like efficient businesses. But smaller law firms often stay small or are not yet at that growth stage. And smaller law firms can make exceptions to experience levels and hiring requirements because they don't have a playbook they're following. So what happens to all businesses, especially smaller law firms, the firms that stay small or also firms that are smaller and will be growing, is they don't have procedures in place. They may stay small because they're not being consistent with procedures. There's all sorts of things that can happen. But in a larger law firm is going to be very concerned about bringing in senior people because it could upset the balance of senior associates trying to become partners or having access to that type of work. Whereas in a smaller law firm, they may not think through this as much. There may be a few owners of the firm. They can do whatever they want. They can do things in a sloppy way, and they may not be sensitive to the same concerns. And when I say sloppy, meaning they can make mistakes and hire the wrong people, and they will continue to do so as they're small because they don't have those same kind of systems in place. And larger law firms can't be as flexible in the way that smaller law firms can. So if someone is 10 years out of school, there's no way that a larger law firm is going to classify them as third year. And smaller law firms have a lot of flexibility with these arrangements. They're less by the book with rates. So they may do individual negotiations with clients about how much they're going to pay. There's just a lot going on. And law firms also have a much easier time recruiting than smaller law firms because of their brands, their salaries, and the access to important work that the candidates and people working there can do. And so they're much more desirable places to work. And because they're much more desirable, they have far more applications. And with more applications, they can be very much more discriminatory. So if you are a senior associate or a partner that's older and someone that's trying to get into one of these firms, it's next to impossible. Because they just don't have to do it, and they're going to try to hire people that are younger and more enthusiastic and have potential to generate business and may not be jaded. But smaller law firms, you don't have the same problems. And the smaller law firms can have a very difficult time hiring people because they don't have the same brands. They may not have the same procedures. They may not be able to pay as much, or they not have access to a sophisticated work, and may want you, as if you're a brand and you've worked at a larger firm, or you have to help with their brand. Some may have one owner that makes decisions, not just a few people. So that owner is going to think about how you can help them. And the centralized power makes it a lot easier to make decisions without committees and get you into the firm. Larger firms are going to have committees and other systems that make it almost impossible for someone without business that's senior. Now, it's not possible, much more difficult, someone's class year to get hired. And the law firms have the economic strength to wait out to get the best candidates instead of hiring a person without the best credentials. So they can afford to wait and lose money rather than hire someone without the best credentials. And if a small law firm has work not getting done in the absence of immediate hiring, they're more likely to feel the pain and hire immediately. Whereas even if you don't have the right amount of experience, like too much or too little. The next exception, this is an interesting one that I think everyone should pay a lot of attention to, especially in a recessionary market where things aren't going as well, is law firms in smaller markets. So smaller law firms in all markets, but law firms in smaller markets are much more flexible than law firms in larger markets. So law firms in smaller markets are likely to have a lot more class year flexibility than a law firm in a major market. And law firms in smaller markets also need to be more flexible because law firms in the largest markets have a lot of people that they can draw from. It can hire people with the exact level of experience they want. One of the advantages of working in the major markets is that you do have access to a lot of firms and places to work, but the law firms also have access to a lot of people. So if they have a job, they're going to get a ton of applications, whereas law firms and smaller law firms will not. And it's even more pronounced in smaller markets because in smaller markets, the law firm, for example, in New York City could attract hundreds of people in capital markets just for a single opening. But a law firm in Detroit that may need to hire for capital markets may be looking from people from Chicago and New York if it has an openings because there's not many of these attorneys there. And then you get into even more issues when and Detroit, by the way, is not necessarily a small market. When you get into even smaller markets, they have fewer people that want to work there than that they can hire from. They may have no one. And some of the smaller markets will be hardly anyone that they can get for different positions. One of the funniest examples that I can think of is I was working I get these kind of calls not pretty often, once every year or two, is there's law firms that are in all these areas of the country that are very remote. And there might be like one attorney, might be two attorneys in the whole area. And then one of those attorneys gets ready to retire and is looking for someone to take over their book of business and help them. And some of these attorneys are making like $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year. And don't even want to, pay a fee or anything. They just want to get someone to do their work. And these are in very remote areas like desert towns and places you've never heard of in California. And just, it's very funny. And there's a lot of these opportunities, but law firms in smaller markets will have often very few people that want to work there. And law firms in these markets cannot be as discriminating about a class share. And this is just another quick story to give you a sense of how this whole thing can work. I had an attorney that had lost her job. And I told this story before, but she lost her job at a big firm in San Francisco because her boyfriend had died, and when she was in her first year practicing. And when that happened, she just decided to leave the firm with 6 months of experience and just had this kind of blank on her resume. It was impossible for her. She applied to every single firm in San Francisco looking for a job. She was a corporate attorney with 6 months of experience and had gone to an okay law school. I don't know which one, like Hastings or something, and done well there, but had applied to every firm in San Francisco and no one would have anything to do with her. And so when I started working with her, I said, let's just apply to firms for you all over in Omaha, in rural Illinois, and all these different places. And suddenly she had 15 interviews and then became unwilling to go on a lot of them. And they were good firms in Arkansas, and some of them were in like Albany, New York and things, but she was suddenly getting all these interviews. So it just shows you when you look at smaller markets, it's often the smartest thing you can do to get a position because there's just not a lot of competition. So it's something that I recommend. And people that are in large cities, I see the craziest stuff. I see attorneys like went to Harvard Law School all the time. They have huge classes, working in contract attorneys sometimes, or working in firms where they're just working part-time because they can't get a position. And there's different reasons for that and problems with the resumes. But if those sorts of people were to look at other markets where there's just not a lot of people like them, they would do very well. So this is a massive job search tip. If you find yourself having a problem in a large market, your most important thing you can do is to continue practicing law. Once you get a blank on your resume, that hurts you. So you look at jobs in smaller markets, and that can make a massive impact on your ability to get a job. I can't tell you how powerful this piece of advice is because there are markets in California all over. People will sit there unemployed for months or years in Los Angeles and the Bay Area, unable to get a job or taking jobs as contract attorneys and just making ends meet when they could work in Fresno or Bakersfield or all these other areas where there's just not a lot of attorneys, Palm Springs, and we get plenty of jobs. And so you have to continue practicing. And sometimes looking at smaller markets is one of the smartest things you can do. Law firms, of course, often pay much more than a large markets. Large law firms in smaller markets don't have as large clients. They can't pay as much as law firms in smaller markets because law firms in large markets represent larger clients with more work who can afford that. But also the most important thing to understand is when you're looking at a smaller market, the cost of living's lower. The time you have with your family or for your personal pursuits is drastically increased. Your odds of making partner or owning your own firm are much higher, and owning your own firm can become incredibly lucrative. And I'm just telling you some examples because it's funny. I know people that, for whatever reason, wound up in smaller markets and started these firms that became incredibly successful doing trust in estates or litigation when they never would have been able to get as many clients probably in a large market, but they were the only person there. And smaller law firms in smaller markets also cannot afford to be as selective. Just the fact that someone wants to work in that market is a big deal. And so if you're senior or junior, they may often bring you on because they can get the work, but they're more likely to be flexible. And then large law firms in large markets also have much more demanding clients. So the firms in the larger markets have lots of competition for work. If you're not doing the work as well as they want, they're going to get rid of you. It's just different. The law firms in the smaller markets don't have those kind of demands. Law firms in the largest markets are likely to represent the most prominent companies. And these companies and their in-house legal services department, meaning they almost always, a lot of these clients have in-house attorneys, and so they're going to be very demanding of what they can require in terms of the attorneys working in the law firms. For example, so if they have an opening for a seventh-year attorney, they're not going to plug in a second-year attorney to do it. Another exception where law firms are likely to be flexible is if you're in a high-demand practice area, which there are high-demand practice areas from time to time. And if you're in one of those practice areas, they're going to be much more flexible than they're not. And if they're not, so some of those practice areas, different practice areas are in demand at different points in time. When COVID-19 hit, everyone thought that bankruptcy is going to be in demand. But then, of course, the government started handing out all this money. And then the practice area that became much hotter was trust in the states. And then family law became incredibly busy because people are all at home and on each other's nerves, but that became incredibly busy. And during economic booms, all sorts of corporate law tends to be in demand. Practice areas can be very popular in demand in different parts of the country. When there was a lot of building occurring in Florida, Texas, and Orange County, California, land use and construction just took off. You couldn't get enough people to do that work, and also real estate. And then when different areas have supercharged real estate markets where there's a lot of building and leasing, practice areas that may be in demand, and law firms that are trying to hire people in hot practice areas where there's just so much growth. that they need to throw bodies at it, they're going to always be much more flexible in terms of the class year because everyone is after the same people. Many times they'll just hire people just to have them because they have so much work that they think they just want to have those people. And if they don't hire quickly, someone else is going to come along and hire the same person. So this will happen with corporate. It'll happen right now, it's happening with intellectual property, biotech, patent prosecution, and litigation, which I'm assuming for some reason that's big. It doesn't matter to me why it is, but there's a huge demand. And law firms, if they don't hire people, will potentially risk the work. So you need to understand when you start seeing a lot of job openings in a certain practice area, that's usually a good sign and means that a lot of times if there's a lot of these openings, even if they're saying they want a third or fourth year, you can often apply as a first year or sixth year to those jobs because the law firms are overwhelmed with work and concerned that people will leave. Another thing that we tend to do in the situation at BCG that works is even if a law firm doesn't have an opening in a very in-demand practice area, they will often interview anyone that comes along that looks good. So even if they don't have a formal opening. And law firms are often very frustrated. They'll have more work than they can handle. They want to find people to help them. And the law firm risks even losing partners unless they find other people to do the work. The next exception is if you have very rare skills, a very impressive background, or otherwise are connected in some other special way. The law firms are going to be a lot more flexible. So attorneys that have scarce skills or backgrounds that make them very rare, sometimes their experience almost becomes irrelevant. For example, I talked earlier about a PhD in electrical engineering. If you have something like that, then firms that do patent prosecution work, or they need patent litigators that have double E backgrounds will definitely be interested in you. People that have held important political offices, positions in important political offices, and are connected and wanting to practice law in a law firm is not uncommon. So I work with people all the time coming out of different positions in government, and those attorneys will get interviews if we just send them to the right firms, even irrespective of openings. Attorneys from certain backgrounds that can bring in a lot of business to the firm are also rare. So I've seen lots of attorneys get hired at firms just because their parent may have, or someone may have brought in business. Niche practice areas are the same thing. So if you're in a very niche practice area many times and you want to apply someplace, you can often apply with it. If they don't have an opening, regardless of what the opening is and the experience level. So FDA approval for a type of drug, working for the FDA, having just things that are very rare. Clerking on the Supreme Court, which I think everyone knows would be very rare. People that went to Yale or Harvard Law School or Stanford or Chicago and smaller markets where there's not a lot of people from top law schools. I clerked in a city called Bay City, Michigan, and there were a couple law firms there, but all the people, the best law, some of them went to Michigan, but in terms of that time, Duke was a much higher ranked law school, and there were just a few people in that market that had gone to good law school. So if you showed up in that market and wanted to work there, people would be impressed. And it wasn't just Bay City, it was Flint and Midland that were surrounding this area. So other things are former Olympic professionals and athletes. I represented a couple Olympic, one was a rower, and anyway, so professional athletes, I've represented them, and those kind of people are rare. And so if you have one of those things in your background, law firms will often just interview you as a matter of course. I had one girl, it was funny, she was moving to Seattle, and she just got all these law firms just crawled out of the woodwork, and she got 15 interviews, and she was working at the time in Illinois or something, but not in Chicago, and just got all these interviews. Law firms will make exception to if there's something exceptional in your background. Many times you don't even need to worry about the firm having a job opening. And then this is just another example, but if you're applying to firms where your background is better than their average attorney, meaning you have something very special in your background that makes you much better, meaning it's usually not just your law school, it's the quality of firm you're at, and that you want to move into the smaller market because you have some reason for being there. You may have grown up there, your spouse is from there, or some other type of reason, then law firms are going to be much more flexible. An example would be you worked in a major law firm in Chicago as a corporate associate after graduating from Chicago Law School. Then you move to a city in Vermont where there are only 2 law firms with more than 10 attorneys, and your qualifications in terms of the sophistication of work you can do will obviously dwarf attorneys in those firms. So regardless of your class year or even an opening, you can apply to those firms and probably almost always will get interviews. And assuming that they don't think you're going to leave or have other reasons, they will interview you. They may hire you for an opening just based on the belief that they're lucky to have you. And again, what would you do if you were a firm like in rural Vermont and had the following choices for a second-year attorney? You'd have a second-year University of Vermont Law School graduate from a 3-person firm with experience helping small businesses, and then the next person was a 9th-year University of Chicago graduate with experience helping multinational corporations. You would almost always choose the one attorney over another. And then here's another type of thing just another exception is sometimes the law firm will have staff attorney openings, and typically they're going to be a lot more flexible than it's for a permanent attorney. Staff attorneys, aren't concerned about their need for advancement. A staff attorney, by the way, is not an associate position. It's a position where you're not on partnership track, but you have a minimum number of hours to bill, and it's just your class year is not going to be as relevant, and they'll consider attorneys at various staff levels for that. This just, again, I apologize for not getting cut off, but law firms will be flexible with class years when they're hiring. Larger firms, it's much more difficult and less likely to be flexible, but there's always exceptions. And most of my placements are of people outside the class year. So there's an art form to knowing how to send people to those firms. I follow all the stuff that I talked about today. And most of our placements are within the buckets I talked about earlier. And then the exceptions and then understanding this is pretty important to understanding the firms to apply to. Okay, so I will take a quick break. And again, I apologize for the internet going out. And when I come back, I'll take questions. I have a lot of time for questions today. If anyone, I hope you can ask as many questions as possible, and I'll answer all of them if I can. And questions are really something I really enjoy because it's important to hear from people about the things that they're trying to do. Oh, and then let me just fix this here, the share. One of the things that I'm excited about is next week I was hoping to do it today, but there was a little bit misunderstanding of what webinar to do. And so we weren't able to do it today. But next week I'm doing what I consider a pretty important webinar. It's about practice settings, meaning the type of practice where you can work with large firm, small firm, but also what type of law you go into. Because I've been very surprised at the success that people have had in practice areas where you normally wouldn't consider people to be very successful. Personal injury and just other things I've been just amazed at when I've talked to some people about what practice areas they're in and how successful they become. I'm excited about doing that. I was hoping to do it today, but this one I got scheduled about class years. One of the reasons we did the one about the class years was selfish because our own candidates keep having questions about that. And so this is something we're going to put into our candidate accounts. Okay, so let me see here. And then on our site where people search for jobs. I did not think this was the most exciting topic to do a webinar on, but I'm glad everyone stuck around for it. Okay, so I'll start at some of the new questions. Give me 1 second. Job postings often include language about the expected number of billable hours. How does that factor into the level that the law firm seek? Yeah, so with the seek and how can attorneys of various experience levels negotiate these expectations? So most of the time when a law firm says they want someone to bill a certain number of hours, they're pretty firm on it. They expect that because they are factoring in the profit they want to make and other factors that go along with it, and then taking work off of existing associates. But you can negotiate that. So people come in all the time and negotiate hours based on things like how many hours that people could be sometimes part-time and agree to a certain number of hours. But in most cases, law firms are pretty firm about the number of billable hours, and negotiating those expectations is definitely possible. I don't really understand how that relates, or I'm not necessarily relates to how you can negotiate these experience levels. But typically, when they talk about the number of hours, they're pretty serious about it. and you certainly can deviate from it, and they will deviate if you're more qualified than other people. But it's something that you have to be pretty much aware of, that when a law firm talks about their expectations, that's what they mean. And it was funny, I was talking to a partner at a big firm the other day, and he has a huge book of business, like it's immense. It's $40 million, and his guarantee is $7 million. I mean, this is the kind of money you can make in a law firm if you're very good at bringing in business. But he was at a big New York firm, and he was representing these kind of mid-sized company clients. And he said that because the associates were so motivated to bill a lot of hours at the big firm, that he moved, and then he moved after that to a big Midwestern based firm. But he said that because the people work so hard on trying to get their hours up, it cost him to do the type of deals he does for his clients about 3 times as much at the New York firm as it cost him at the firm he went to or moved to. And he did that because he was losing clients, charging them so much more. The big firms will often have very strong expectations about the number of hours you bill. And then if you're in an environment where everyone's doing that, you'll have to do that. It's very difficult to negotiate the amount of hours you're going to work. And if you start doing that, then law firms will have less interest in you. Now, you can do that. I've seen women do that quite well when they're raising families, and law firms I don't have a problem with that. But at the same time, many times you have to be, the law firms are pretty firm about their billable hours. Okay, you mentioned that law firms hire recent graduates. When does this occur? As a recent graduate, May 23, I'm having a hard time finding positions, especially in New York City. Yes, that's the thing I'm trying to tell everyone, and I hope this makes sense. If you are having a hard time finding a position, then you're probably, in most cases, trying to work in the largest market possible, because the largest markets will be difficult places to get positions, because there's so many people trying to work in those firms. Because there's so many people trying to work in those firms, it's very easy for law firms to hire people with experience. So if you're a small law firm in New York, rather than hiring someone that's new, that doesn't have a lot of experience, you're much more likely to hire someone with 1 or 2 years of experience, because you can just plug them in right away and they know what they're doing. So my advice to everyone that's trying to go into large markets, I have a lot of pieces of advice, but if you didn't go to a top law school and didn't do well there, or did okay, you can certainly work in a large market and get a job as a junior attorney. But you're going to have a very hard time getting anywhere near the large law firms, because they have plenty of people to choose from. And also, you're going to have a harder time getting a position as a recent graduate, because law firms will prefer to hire people with experience rather than train them. And what would you do if you were a firm? You would want someone that already had training. So your objective is to get training. Now, if you are really trying to get a position, there's a couple different ways to do it. You can go into what are called consumer-facing practice areas, meaning you're working for consumers. And so practice areas. So what does that mean? You're working for individuals as opposed to companies. And meaning companies are just harder to get jobs with. But that means things like consumer bankruptcy. It means insurance defense, slip and fall people and stuff. So insurance defense. It means immigration. It means trust and estates. I could give you tons of these, but anything where you're working for individuals. So many times you will be able to get jobs without any experience in large cities doing this type of work, because and you will get paid a lot less than you would in a firm doing non-consumer. And this is basically if you want to work in a firm. The other thing you can do that's very smart in large cities that I highly recommend is you can work for solo practitioners or solos or very small firms, and often they will be happy to have somebody help them. And this is just a really good strategy. that I recommend that anybody try to follow in a large city. And if you're having a difficult time getting a job, you need to seek out solos. Sometimes you can send them a letter, or you can, which would be an email telling them you want to work for them. I guarantee you that they never receive expressions of interest. So if you do that, they will be much more receptive to bringing you in than they would, and that it's just much easier. This is a very good way to get a job. You can also get experience in all sorts of practice areas because some of them will do corporate work, some of them will do other things, but this is a very good way to get a position. But any firm out there that is looking for people, that's a larger firm, will have their choice of people. So you better be pretty good if you want to get a position with them. I told the story earlier in this webinar about people that I've seen from Harvard Law School that can't get jobs in New York, trying to work with larger firms and are working as contractors and things. Now, that's ridiculous. If they were in anywhere in the Midwest, except on one of the coasts, they would get plenty of jobs. If they were in Las Vegas, they would get plenty of jobs. If they were, anywhere that there's not a lot of people like them. But if you go to a big city, there's tons of people that went to top law schools, and there's tons of people that from big firms and looking to go to smaller firms, and it's just very difficult. So you're going to have a very hard time, especially in a large city. Now, the other thing so your options are many times to do consumer-facing work or to work for solos or very small firms that could use the help and don't necessarily attract a lot of applications because all these super highly qualified people in New York City are going to be looking for them. The other option that I would suggest, I'll just throw it out there, would be to work in a smaller market. The problem with trying to succeed in a large city, whether it's like New York or whatever, but you have to work in a smaller market if you want to work for companies. So I want to just give you for companies. So I want to just give you a little bit of an example of what I'm talking about. If you work for a company, I forgot personal injury up here. If you work for a company, the company has a lot of money to throw at different issues. So meaning if they hire an attorney and they need help with whatever, litigation because they're sued, they can write checks and spend a lot of money on legal fees, whereas any of these consumer-facing people can't. If you want to work with companies, meaning there can be more money involved, and you can potentially make more money. If you want to do that, then you're better off looking at smaller markets. At smaller markets, they're not going to care so much about your law school, all this stuff, but they're going to just be more interested in you because they don't have a lot of applications. But I think to get hired in a large market, unless you have very good experience, it's just very difficult. It's even difficult, by the way, if you sometimes what happens a lot is most big law firms will hire, almost all big firms in big cities hire summer associates. And those summer associates, there's always some in each class that don't get offers because they get drunk at an office party or they don't do good work or who knows, but they don't get jobs. So when that happens, it's very difficult for them to find positions. So imagine how difficult it would be for you to find a position if you weren't a summer associate at a firm or if you don't have a position lined up. It's also very difficult. This is just for law students that may be on this call. I wanted to bring up a couple things. If you want to work in a law firm and you don't have a law firm on your summer experience, that makes it even more difficult. So if you want to work in a law firm, you need to have a law firm. You want to work for a law firm, you need to have a law firm on your summer experience. Otherwise, you look like you don't want to work in a law firm. So it's just a firm on your summer. If you're a law student, you need to work in a law firm in the summer if you want to work in a law firm, because it becomes much, much more difficult to get a position if you haven't done that. Okay, I hope that answers your question, because this is something I see all the time. I see tons of law students that come out of school that have graduated that are unable to get positions. Now, sometimes passing the bar will, once you've done that in whatever city you're in, New York, or will make you much more marketable, and law firms will start hiring you. But like anything, you need to start at the bottom. And that's my advice about how to do that. I realize it's a lot I said, but in most cases, these are your options. And if you want to work for, say you want to do like this, I'm just going to start to keep going on this, but say you want to do corporate law. And you really want to do corporate law. Instead of looking at New York, maybe you could look at New Jersey, and you could look at other, take the bar at the same time after you take, anyway, or you could work in some other smaller East Coast city. And then when you get experience, you might even be able to move into a mid-sized firm in New York, or even a large firm if there's a boom. So all this stuff can help you quite a bit if you follow that advice. But I would recommend, if you want to do work that involves doing work for companies, try to possibly work in a smaller firm, a very smaller firm, a much smaller firm, or for a solo or something like that, or work in a smaller market. And I see people, I don't understand it, but I see people moving to these large markets all the time that are setting themselves up by not applying to the right places, or also are just thinking that they're going to get a job doing something that they're not, that they aren't qualified for, and then ending up very upset that they're not getting jobs, and then taking temporary jobs as contract attorneys and so forth, and then never breaking out of that. Right now, sometimes people will decide they really want to do something. They'll say, I really want to do data privacy, and I'm not going to take anything except the data privacy job, and they're trying to do it in New York City. Or I really want to work as a trademark attorney, and they're trying that in New York City, where there might only be a few openings coming along. I mean, these are huge career mistakes. You have to get in. If you want to do a practice area, you have to be very careful about the practice area you choose. And you also need to get employed as soon as possible, because once 6 months goes by, you said you graduate in May, it becomes, you can say, I'm applying for jobs now that I passed the bar, but you start looking like somebody that no one is interested in, and that's just not selling yourself very well. So you need someone to take a chance on you and hire you. You need to make it an obsession and something that you're trying to really get out there and make sure that you're all in, that people are, that you're getting a job regardless if it's with a solo or a small firm or a firm in a smaller market. So you need to follow my advice, because you don't want to, the reason I'm so firm about all this is I see so many careers never get started or have all sorts of problems because they don't do it. You just need to do something. If you don't do something, you'll be nowhere. And so you have to do something. And you go into one of these things. You go into one of these. If you want to be in a big city, you go into a consumer-facing personal injury. You go into a consumer-facing job if you really want to do that. Or if you want to go into a company-facing work, you find a solo practitioner and apply to a bunch of them. It's not that hard. You can do a search for people that do your practice area on Google. And once you do that practice area, like you could do, and I'll just show you how this works. It's really pretty easy. If you want to do, say you're in Memphis, Tennessee, and you want to do trust in estates, you would just do a search for trust in estates attorneys in Nashville, right? So Nashville. And then what's interesting is that you start getting all this. Now, look, you have all these people, Music City Estate Law, the law office of these people, all these firms, if you want to do trust in estates, you can apply to. And there's just tons of them. There's going to be more than this. There's more than these people. Or you could go back to doing searches like this, just all these different places, and it just keeps going. I mean, look how many of them there are next. And so this is what smart people do. If you really want a job, all you need to do is just find all the places to apply to. You don't need to worry about seeing the job opening and cast your lot applying to the same job openings and more qualified people than you are. All of these law firms are probably not getting applications from people that want to work there. What about Joe Hyatt? This poor guy, let's see here, probably doesn't have, look, about Joe, doesn't have a lot of people that are applying to work with him. So you have to be smart. Like you have to this is one of the easiest things you can do. This alone, this piece of advice, hopefully can save your career. You can do it for any practice area. You can apply to small places, and these people will hire you because no one's applying to them. It's insane. So if you say, I really want to learn trust in estates law, I'm enthusiastic about trust in estates law, I love your background in trust in estates, can I come in for an informational interview? or something where you talk to them. People will do it and you'll get jobs. But if you sit around waiting for job openings to appear, then you're just screwing yourself over. So don't do it. Sorry to be firm about this, but this is crazy. Like, people do this all the time and end up not getting jobs. They just sit around waiting for things. And you can do it for any practice area. You could do, let's say, small business attorneys in Quincy, Illinois. I don't even know if I just heard the name of the small business attorneys. Sorry. Attorneys in Quincy, Illinois, regardless of the area of the country. Look at this. I can't believe there's law firms in Quincy, Illinois. I've been there. There's nothing there. Look at all these people. You can go to Rober Law. What the heck's that? The point is that do you think people are applying to this to work with Mr. Rober? Rober Law. Attorneys. Oh, we got Rober and we got Tyler Phillips. Tyler Phillips looks like he's the guy that's helping him. So this is how it works. If you apply to these small, and they're doing business law. So the point is that you need to figure out, you can't just sit around and wait to be slaughtered by the market by not applying places. You need to find solos to work for. You need to go into consumer-facing practice areas. You cannot base your career on waiting for job openings to appear, especially in a large city. Like, if you're not really highly qualified in a large city, it's very difficult to get a job. So you need to find jobs that other people aren't doing. Again, sorry to go into so much detail about that question, but it's a very good question. And unfortunately, because people don't take action and understand this, so many people destroy their careers or never get off the ground, when it's very easy. You just need to apply to the right places and apply to help people that need help. How does the selection process differ for attorneys who have completed a judicial clerkship versus those who have not? Are law firms inclined to hire attorneys with clerkship experience, and how does that impact the job search for recent law school graduates? So clerkships. So you have different types of clerkships. So you have state court, and then you have trial, appellate, Supreme Court. And then you have the same thing with federal clerkships. Just federal clerkships. And then you have a bunch of specialized clerkships, acts, just different types of ones. Okay, so your questions about a clerkship and how does that impact the job search for recent law school graduates? So I've had a couple of interesting experiences. I don't know why I keep coming back to Harvard Law School today, but I was working with a guy recently that hadn't gotten a position after a summer associate job. And then not only did not get a position, but he didn't get a position when he was trying to interview his third year, because people come to top law schools your third year. And so the law school was like, you know what, go rush out and get a clerkship. And so he was working as a state court clerk in Delaware or something, and then looking for a job after that. So clerkships are very smart. If you can get a clerkship, if you're not getting a position in a law firm by your second semester of your third year, regardless of where you went to law school, you can definitely start applying for clerkships, and it's very smart. So there's different types of clerkships. Obviously, we'll actually have magistrates at the federal level. So the federal clerkships are the best because typically they're a little bit more competitive. Magistrate clerkships aren't as competitive, but the trial are competitive, and then the appellate are more competitive in the Supreme Court. It's just the reason there's different levels of competition is because there's more trial judges and there are appellate judges, and there's more appellate judges and there are Supreme Court judges. So federal clerkships are a good thing. State court clerkships are a good thing. Federal tend to give more ability to work nationally. Meaning nationwide, and then state court gives you more ability to work locally. So it's especially at the trial court, attorneys that do trial court, state court clerkships often get a lot of jobs and interviews around the location where they clerked, whereas federal clerkships, often a firm in New York doesn't necessarily care if you clerk in the Eastern District of New York they may, but not as much. Clerkships for recent law school graduates are a very smart thing. What it does when you come out of a clerkship, though, And this is very important for everyone to understand. If you have a clerkship, I just want to be very clear because I see attorneys making this mistake every day. So what happens when you have a clerkship is the only practice area that anybody's going to be interested in you for. So people will say, oh, I'm coming out of my clerkship, I want to do environmental law. Or, oh, I'm coming out of my clerkship, I want to do, I don't know, whatever. Really, the only practice area that you should be trying to get a job in is commercial litigation. That's pretty much it. Commercial litigation is really what all clerkships are setting you up to do. And if you're doing appellate work, no, there's not a lot of appellate jobs. So you want to try to do most clerkships, you have to do commercial litigation. So it's very smart to do a clerkship many times if you don't have a job when you're entering your entering your third year, because a clerkship just it gives you an extra year to get experience. The nice thing about a clerkship is that judges will train you. You'll learn not to have someone just watching over you. It's awesome because you're basically getting trained by one person. I mean, the whole year you're there. It's a very smart thing to do. I think if you've completed a clerkship and you're coming out of a clerkship, you need to do the same thing as you would as a law school graduate. You need to, by the second half of your clerkship, meaning if your clerkship starts in September, then by March, you should be going all out and trying to get positions. So you should be applying to openings. You should be applying to firms that don't have openings. You should try to decide what you want to do. In almost all cases, though, the experience you're getting as a clerk is going to prepare you to do commercial litigation. It's not, if you work in the appellate, it's not going to teach you to do appellate. If you work in the Supreme Court, the only people that can apply consistently to appellate jobs and get them are people that clerked on the Supreme Court. Even an appellate, like a circuit court clerkship at a federal level, there's not enough jobs for that. So that's my recommendation about all that. But yeah, clerkships do help you. And it's also a very smart thing to do if you don't have a position. Like at this time of year, within a few months or 3 or 4 months, if you're a law student, you don't have a position, then a clerkship as a backup is very smart, something that I recommend. You are more employable out of a clerkship many times than someone that just passed the bar. That's a very smart thing to do for a lot of people. These are great questions. I'm very impressed by these questions today, especially since so many people, I think there were a lot of questions, then everyone got knocked off the call. Let's see here. Situations where law firms prioritize other qualities or skills over specific years of experience, such as cultural fit or niche expertise. How can attorneys effectively convey these attitudes in their applications and interviews to increase their chances of success? Okay, so your resume. I just want to make sure everyone understands. A resume needs to be focused, hopefully, on one practice area. That's it. You don't say corporate and P. No one thinks this is a good thing, by the way. A small firm that has generalists and things, but most law firms don't like you to be focused on multiple practice areas. If you focus on one, that's going to increase your expertise. If you niche corporate and IP, other things like how do you convey attributes of years of experience, cultural fit. And cultural fit can be done in a lot of different ways. Sometimes there are firms that are composed primarily of Republicans, for example. All the partners will say they're members of the Federalist Society, or I don't know, but things like that. I had an instance once years ago where I was representing someone that was like a diehard Republican, and there was only one firm in all of San Francisco a couple that had a bunch of Republicans in it, and they loved him. And even though they never had hardly ever hired, they were very quick to make him an offer. So that's sometimes if a law firm is composed of people like that, they may like you. Sometimes when you talk about cultural fit, that's one way that things work that way, but also that the niche expertise. But if you're able to increase that and show that stuff in your application, that can be very helpful. So law firms that are seeking someone in one specific type of practice area often will be interested in certain types of people like that. So that can be very helpful. But cultural fit is a very difficult thing to convey. some types of ways to do cultural fit. There are some law firms that I've run across that are all composed of women or all composed of people of a certain religion or race or what. And so sometimes that can be a help. They're very proud to be all women firms and things. So there's just different ways to convey that stuff, but you definitely need to be very careful for the cultural fit. But the niche expertise is really the most important. It is a good question. Let me get this one done. Okay, so in your view, how does the trend of law firms hiring outside their supposed years of experience requirements vary across different practice areas? Are there specific areas of law when this is more prevalent? Yes. So there are specific areas of law. So give me 1 second here, and I will show you some of those areas of law. Just give me 1 second. I have to go into the BCG database to do this. That's part of the problem. Actually, I can do it in a different place. Give me 1 second. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm pulling this up. It's interesting. So these are some practice areas like on BCG, and you're talking about different practice areas where firms are likely to hire people outside of their years of experience. Anything that's very niche, so like alcohol and beverage law would be one. Antitrust is actually, there's not a lot of those positions, but that would be one. Art law would be one. Different types of bankruptcy could be one, but not as often. Cannabis law would be one. There's not obviously a lot of people doing that. Construction law is often one because there's actually a dearth in many cases of people doing construction litigation. So that would be one. Data privacy, no, there's a lot of people trying to do that. Education's one. There's not a lot of people doing that. So those types of attorneys tend to get a lot of positions. Energy, oil, and gas, not as much because there's too many attorneys doing that. Entertainment, not as much. There's too much competition, too many people trying to do that. Environmental, not as much. Same thing. There's not enough. There's just too many people trying to do it. ERISA is a big one. ERISA is a very smart practice area to go into because there's just not a lot of people doing it, especially just regular ERISA executive compensation or general. These attorneys do well and get hired all throughout their career, and it can be a very good practice area. Family law is one where there's not a lot of people hiring outside the practice area. Finance in some cases, but not really as much. I've seen finance attorneys with very good backgrounds continue practicing long into their career without business, but typically these are people that were trained by the best firms in the country, but it's very rare. General practice, no. Government, no. Healthcare is one where people get hired outside of their experience level, mainly for healthcare compliance and not so much litigation. So that's one. Immigration was a very popular practice area for a while, but unless you have business in immigration, it can be very difficult. And typically immigration firms are small. There's some big ones like Fragaman and some other ones, but that's very difficult. Insurance, I've seen a lot of times people get hired in insurance coverage outside the experience level, depending on the type of coverage they do. Sometimes regulatory compliance, but most of this other insurance, no. Intellectual property, other than litigation, almost all forms of patent law, people will hire outside of the experience level, all forms. So there's just a huge demand for patent attorneys. Most of them, if they're marketed properly, regardless of their class year, will get interviews. Same thing with patent agents. That's not really something we cover here, but definitely not litigation and not trademark. Labor and employment, sometimes it can work. The biggest exception here would be traditional labor law unions. If law firms, there's not a lot of people that do that. So that's one. Almost all forms of litigation are very difficult to get hired outside of your practice, outside of your experience level. I talked about construction, that can work. E-discovery can work because those are usually not ones where you have that. Sometimes these different medical malpractice, there's a lot of demand for that. So people can get hired outside of their practice area, outside of their experience level. And again, we're just going through all of these and you can see here, like municipal law is one, but mainly transactions and land use. And real estate, typically no. Tax, typically no. Telecommunications, no. Trust and estate, sometimes, depending on that. So that's it. So there's not a ton of practice areas where you can get hired outside of your experience level. And why is that prevalent? A lot of it has to do with a competition, like the number of people competing for the same jobs. And because there's so many of them, competing for the same jobs, there's no reason for the law firms to hire outside their experience level. The only reason would be if there's not a lot of people in that practice area. And typically, that practice area, like I told you, is that there's typically not as many people doing that practice area. The only other experience thing I'd like to bring up real quickly is, again, the smaller the market you're looking at, the larger the potential of the law firm hiring outside of a certain practice area. Have you seen exaggerated levels of experience they seek in job postings potentially leading to the misunderstandings? Have you come across instances where law firms may exaggerate the level of experience they seek in job postings, potentially leading to misunderstandings or misrepresentations? Are there any legal ramifications? So that's a good for firms that engage in such practices. So we were investigated, a BCG of all places, by the Justice Department in some sort of division for writing what the firms were seeking for, like 2 to 6 years of experience and that sort of thing. And they were someone who filed a complaint against us about that. And after 2 years, and we won. It's not that we had a lot of attorneys involved or anything. We just told them what was going on. So I don't think there's any legal ramifications to firms that engage in those practices. There's just a preference for people to move up at a certain level, and for if law firms want younger people, and then mid-levels and so forth. But what I would say, it's very interesting, is there's a lot of people that go to law school and come out of law school at the age of 45 and things like that, or 50, and they're still hired as first-year associates. It's just what the discrimination is against the amount of experience you have. So that's typically what the law firms are most concerned about, is how much experience you have versus your age and that sort of thing. It's just based on experience. I honestly didn't think there were going to be a lot of questions about experience level. And we had a lot of people show up for this webinar, and I was a little nervous about it because I thought the topic wasn't as interesting as I thought. I'm glad there's all these questions. Is there a point in which your experience and practice area becomes too specialized for marketability, such as being a patent pharmaceutical attorney that only deals with one type of product or chemical entity or a single statutory cause of action? How do you know when you need to diversify without losing the benefit of having a consistent focus? Yeah, so there are some, again, with the patent law work you're doing, I always find it fun because there are people like you, if you're a patent pharmaceutical attorney doing one type of product, there's always, when we search the BCG database, we can always find 1 or 2 firms that, even if it's the most remote type of patent law, that have done that type of work. I remember placing not too long ago a partner from a huge New York, not huge San Francisco or Washington, D.C. firm working in Colorado. It was getting pushed out because he was 65 and didn't have any business, but he was a specialist in one type of patent law. And so I searched for all the firms that had ever had that type of position. And there was only like 3 or 4 of them in the whole country. And one of them was in Texas. And when they got his resume, they couldn't believe it. And he couldn't believe it when they talked to them. They were doing this type of work. And he got hired and never even been to Texas, and moved there with his family from Colorado, where he'd been his whole career. A lot of times being very focused can help you. Sometimes people are very focused in one branch of corporate law, and there may be only another firm in the whole city that does that type of work. You have to be very careful about being too specialized. Most patent attorneys aren't that specialized, but you can be. And then you have to be geographically flexible. And then you need a patent attorney doing life sciences related work can often do different types of patent law in life sciences, and so that's okay. And so you typically would be marketable in that. And if you're doing insurance coverage, you may do a little bit of other type of work, but being very specialized is generally not a drawback, and can, you're pretty much, if there are firms that do the type of work. But if they're not, then you need to be careful. Now, one other thing I would say that's interesting is if you're very specialized in one type of practice area, and this is something a lot of people don't think of, being very specialized in one practice area, you can often go and find the clients that need that kind of work. So if you're doing a certain type of patent, you could always go in-house with the kind of companies that are doing that usually, or a certain type of corporate law, or a certain type of real estate transactional law. And so that's just what a lot of people do when they're trying to do it. Recent graduate and Illinois bar passer. Okay. Any tips on how to get a firm position practicing privacy law when I went to school in the Bay Area? Privacy law is something that everyone wants to do now. There are all these privacy, and I don't know why. People are just coming out of law school. I don't know if there's a certified privacy professional or I don't know, but whatever, this is a certification. I think that this is a very, very difficult practice area to get into for a lot of reasons, but people like it. The benefits of being a privacy attorney is you can go in-house and make a ton of money. But the problem with privacy right now is that everyone wants to do it. I don't know why, but everyone wants to do it. I see resumes every day where people try to make themselves look like privacy attorneys, and then they go to the website and they may be doing dog bite law or something. It's just hilarious. But everybody wants to do privacy. And again, I don't know why. I don't know if law schools are talking about how great it is, but everybody wants to do it. My biggest piece of advice for everyone is, and I've been seeing a lot of privacy attorneys get jobs. I did 3 or 4 years ago when there were hardly any of them. But you need to concentrate on something where there's a hungry market, and you can sell what you're doing in the market, and you can sell what you're doing. So what does that mean? That means that if there's not a lot of people buying privacy attorneys at the moment, that's going to be a very hard place to get a job in. People come out of law school all the time with these ideas like, oh, I want to be a trademark attorney, or I want to be an intellectual property attorney with no background and anything to do with. So you have to put yourself in a situation where you can sell what you're doing. And I don't think it's a good idea to try to go into something where it's very difficult to get a position because everyone's trying to do it. That's just my idea. You can't try to do it. I think this is a very hard practice area at the moment because everyone's trying to do it. I have not seen people have a ton of success at the moment. I think that it's just the market is overwhelmed with people trying to do it. That doesn't mean you can't do it. You have to find people that are doing that type of work, maybe in smaller firms, but you have to be very careful about that. Recent bar graduates, like what is bar graduates? The easiest jobs to get are always in litigation, all the time. So you need to, and you don't want to, one of my biggest pieces of advice is when you're applying, if you don't have a lot of experience in a practice area, when you're applying for jobs when you're in law school and you never got, and you just aren't, there's no reason that a law firm would particularly put you in one practice area or another. Like, you do not say, I want to do privacy and that's it. You do not say, I want to do environmental and that's it. Now, if you want to be a patent attorney and you majored in something technical and you could take the patent bar, that's fine. But you never want to block yourself out and make it look like you only want to do one practice area. Because if you look like you only want to do one practice area, then law firms are going to have a very hard time hiring you. You want to make yourself as marketable as possible. And being as marketable as possible means applying to firms and basically telling them that you're open to doing whatever you want. What's very funny is people go to these great law schools like Stanford and Harvard and Yale and things, and then they go to work in a law firm in the summer, and they have no idea what the law firm is going to do with them. They often don't have any choice. And so someone could be like, I've gone to Yale Law School and been a superstar in the classics and graduated with a doctorate at the age of 25 from some great school and then taught at a university classes about Homer or something. And then all of a sudden they go to a law firm in the summer and they're put in the corporate department. And they work there and they spend their careers there. So you do not have to you don't want to put yourself in a box when you're a young attorney, because if you do that, it's going to hurt you and it's going to make it much more difficult for you to get a position in the long run. You let the law firm read into whatever you are and then put you in something. You don't want to, put yourself into a practice area and just say, I want to do this and expect law firms to hire you. They have no incentive to just hire you for something like that. So you need to be very careful. The only other thing I would say about someone like with a certain background, if you have a background in privacy law, like you worked in a company before law school doing privacy law. You worked in a law firm in the summer doing privacy law. You've written a lot of papers about privacy law and law review articles. Then hell yeah, go for it. But most people don't have that. The other thing is sometimes people will have, they want to be healthcare attorneys, will have something like they worked in the healthcare industry for 10 years before, or 5 years before going to law school. And then they went to law school and they were on the Health Law Society and were on a healthcare journal and wrote some healthcare things and everything about them. And maybe they majored in some healthcare discipline when they were in college, and maybe they went to master's degree. So if you look like that on paper, then yeah, people will hire you to be a healthcare attorney, and that's what you should be doing. But unless you look like you really have experience in something, then no one's going to hire you for that. Why would they? They might, but if you're just going into a very competitive practice area like privacy and say you want to do it, you're going to have a very hard time unless you look like a privacy attorney already. Why would a law firm engage a recruiter and pay to fill a position compared to using Indeed or State Bar websites to post positions? Is it mostly to fill niche positions? So that's a good question. Indeed is obviously a place where law firms go to find people. They also find them from their websites. They also find them from their existing attorneys. But the point is that what a recruiting firm does is a lot more than just sending people to the firm and getting the firm. The law firm curates attorneys. So meaning if they post a job on Indeed, we post jobs on Indeed. We post jobs on our own site, Law Crossing. We post jobs on LinkedIn. We post them all sorts of things. But the biggest time suck is curating attorneys. So that means knowing the right people for the job. So what does that mean? So that means if you post it, if the law firm posts a job on Indeed, they might get, or Indeed or wherever, Law Crossing, whatever the site is, they might get 200 applications, and most of them are just going to be work to get through. This is how it works. They're not going to be the right applicants. And so that's just, it takes a lot of time. If I review 200 applications to BCG each day, it typically takes me 3 hours to review them maybe. So that's a lot of time. And I know exactly how to curate them. So it takes a lot of time. So they have to do that. They also do not know the levels persons of interest. So when we get a candidate in, we already do that. So what we do is we talk to the person and we interview them. We understand their salary requirements. We interview them and get all the information that a law firm would want before they talk to the person. We get all that information. We also act as an intermediary. When you go to buy a house or you buy anything, you typically will use an intermediary. So what an intermediary does, I don't know how I'm spelling this prior today, but geez, look at that. Horrible. Act as an intermediary. When two sides are coming together, like if a law firm's interviewing a candidate, the candidate will misinterpret things that the law firm's saying, and the law firm may misinterpret things that the candidate's saying. So what happens is in that whole process, if there's not a recruiter involved, it blows up a lot. When there's a recruiter involved, everything comes together in a way that wouldn't normally. And so by the time the law firm gets a candidate from someone like BCG, the law firm the candidate has already been vetted. They know that the candidate's a fit. It doesn't take a lot of work for them. And this is something, by the way, that we're working on all the time, like making sure we're making accurate matches and figuring things out. The other thing is a recruiter typically maintains a huge database. Like not all of them, most recruiters don't. But so we have a huge database of hundreds of thousands of people. So what that means is that we can find people that the law firm would never be able to find. So what does that mean? That means a law firm might be in St. Louis and need a certain type of patent attorney. If the law firm puts an ad on Indeed, it's probably not going to get the attention of the people that are sitting around in our database that we would tell about it. So we're able to get candidates that the law firm normally would not get. Not everybody is sitting around on Indeed. Most times when there's a job, the only time they're looking on Indeed or Law Crossing or something is when they need a job. But a lot of times the best candidates are the ones that are working and aren't looking for a job, which are called passive candidates. And then they don't just use them to fill niche positions. So many times the recruiters will bring in a different caliber of attorney from the what the law firms are going to get from these sites. And so that's another thing. The other thing the recruiter does is we anticipate potential openings. So what does that mean? So we know if this is something that's very helpful for openings. This is something that's very helpful for a lot of our candidates, because we have an idea of where the person's likely to get hired. And then the other thing I would say is, in a lot of large cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, like, a lot of firms expect the person to come through a recruiter. So that when you say when you say the law firm is not interested in using a recruiter because of the expense, it's insane. Because in almost every industry, in the entertainment industry, in the sports industry, in most industries, everyone that's any good has an agent. So all actors have agents, all writers have agents, anybody that's at a professional level. And most firms at the higher level, like the best firms, almost expect you to have an agent. They don't care if a recruiter has a fee that is maybe 20 days of you working or something or whatever, of your billable hour. They just want the best people. And it's a lot of work for them to go through resumes of people that aren't qualified and then have to respond to them and so forth. Whereas if the recruiter's involved, the recruiter can do all that. The recruiter acts as an intermediary. It shows them the type of people. It knows that has to give them good candidates. It gets people to take jobs by explaining the firm better that normally wouldn't. It makes sure the person's excited when they go into the interview, as opposed to just asking questions about salary and not necessarily knowing about the firm. So there's just a lot of things that a recruiter does that wouldn't normally be done when the law firm is hiring on their own. So in big cities, almost all the hires come through recruiters, partners and associates and others. The law firms almost expect to be a recruiter involved. If the candidate's applying on their own, many times there's actually a lot of what do you call it, questions about why would the person be applying on their own? Are they not? What's going on? Are they applying and that sort of thing. So that's a lot of what's going on. There's also a lot of firms that use recruiters that just don't know how to get people. They just have no idea. They know they can post a job somewhere, but they don't understand how to read an application. They don't understand different things that a recruiter can explain. Again, most law firms use recruiters. Now there's ones that don't. There's smaller law firms in some areas of the country that, like, if you're going to rural Vermont, they won't necessarily use a recruiter, but they won't necessarily care who they hire either. So that's how it works. One of the things I would tell you is that it used to be with recruiters, and you're asking me a kind of an interesting question for myself, but it used to be recruiters only worked, and it's still this way, with the largest firms seeking out the certain types of people. So the largest firms would never have a problem paying recruiting fees. In fact, almost all their hires came through recruiters in the big cities. So the second an opening came out, everybody would start calling everyone in the city, trying to find people for the job. And then that would just how it worked. Now it's very interesting. And so people like personal injury attorneys and trust and estates attorneys and all these sorts of practice areas never got any attention. Those are actually some of the most active workers' compensation, some of the most active practice areas and our firm now for recruiting. And so there's most law firms use recruiters. Small law firms use recruiters. We get calls all the time from solo practitioners and small towns and things, and that they can't attract people on their own. And so the ability to put people into firms that they qualified and well-curated people into firms is a huge benefit. Our company makes hundreds of placements per year. So obviously law firms use recruiters, and a lot of times candidates they think, they're going to be disadvantaged if they use a recruiter, but that's just not true. You're actually getting more likely to get a job than if you didn't use a recruiter. Now, I used to think when I was when I was a junior attorney, that law firms why would a law firm use a recruiter? And it's just, they all do. There's very few firms that we have that don't interview candidates through us, because we provide them the best candidates that are screened and match what they're seeking. It's not a lot of work for them. The candidates come into interviews are much likely to be prepared and do better. So there's a whole bunch of reasons that they do. That's a good question. Sorry. Okay, so this next question this is a good one. What do you consider a smaller market? And what do you think about being barred in a big state? So a smaller market, first of all, there's UBE scores that are transferable. So that's just one thing to always keep in mind. Score is transferable. Okay, so smaller markets there's smaller markets in every big market. So if you're barred say you're barred in Michigan, your big cities in Michigan are going to be like, Michigan would be Detroit, and then you have, sorry, give me a second. I'm just giving you an example. You would have Detroit, and then you have Grand Rapids. What else? I don't know what the big cities. Grand Rapids, maybe, I don't know, Flint's not a big city anymore. Oh, and Ann Arbor, those are some big areas. And then maybe Lansing, those are bigger markets there, I think. But the thing is, there's hundreds of other smaller markets around there. So there's hundreds. So you have Traverse City, and you have, I don't know, Midland, and just all these hundreds of little markets like that, Muskegon and Midland. Just so the point is that in every state, and this is just a small, I don't know, Muskegon, I don't know. But so this is just one state. So what a lot of people do, and obviously Detroit would be the biggest one, and then most people that would work in Detroit would never think about Ann Arbor or Lansing. But then you have these kind of submarkets, and then submarkets that are even submarkets there. So every state is like this. So every state, most people are trying to do, every state people are trying to work in Detroit. If it's Michigan, and every state in Illinois, people are trying to work in Chicago. So every state has much smaller markets within it. So there's no reason to concentrate only on the biggest cities. If you're looking for a job and you're looking in Chicago or Detroit, you can also look in the suburbs. So there's going to be all these suburbs of Detroit. So there's tons of suburbs, and a lot of the jobs now these days are in the suburbs and not Detroit itself because of this matter. But you can look in the suburbs of the big cities, and there's jobs. So I'll just tell you a quick story that's fun. I used to have an office in Chicago where there were several recruiters, and they were, when the 2008 financial crisis came, all the recruiters in all the different markets kept sending people to big firms. And I said to them, the only way you're going to get through this success is the way you want to, is to start concentrating on sending your candidates to firms in the suburbs. So make sure you start looking at the suburbs of Chicago instead of Chicago. And when they did that, they had the best year ever as an office because all of their placements were at big firms outside of the city. So one of the things you may ask yourself, we were talking about recruiters, is why would these law firms that were in these smaller markets never got a lot of applicants from big firms in Chicago, and suddenly they were getting them. So if you try to work in the largest cities, you're always going to have a lot more competition, and it's going to be harder for you to get a position. So every state is going to have a lot of areas within it that you can work in, that if you concentrate on trying to work in the largest firms, it's always going to be difficult for you. What would an example be? So an example would be if you look at what are the 50 largest, literally can find this information, 50 largest cities in Chicago, cities in Illinois. I'm just giving you an example. Here's a list, right? So you have Chicago, Aurora, like all these different places. All of these firms, Naperville, Joliet, 150,000, 149,000, 100, all these firms are going to have needs for attorneys. There's absolutely no way they won't. So even 50,000 is enough. When you get down to 25,000, you're going to start having fewer law firms, but people aren't thinking about working in Vernon Hills or Round Lake Beach. So this is the smart way to get a job, is you just take any city or any state and you look at the smaller markets and you start applying there as opposed to Chicago. Crazy. Like, why would you? This is fine. It's a big city, but everyone's trying to work there. You're going to have a lot less competition in Aurora or Joliet than you're going to have in Chicago. And by the way, all of these cities still have work to do on behalf of companies. So there's still firms that need good corporate lawyers and different types of attorneys, but no one does this. Why? For me, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why would people be not looking at the cities that aren't big? So that's what you do. That's what everyone should do. I don't understand why people don't do it. Everyone's focused on the large cities. But if you start looking at the smaller markets, you suddenly have the ability to get all sorts of jobs that no one else is able to get. So it's very smart. Okay, so again, I appreciate all these questions. These are great questions. What professional steps would you recommend a future law student interested in M&A law that just left a personal injury firm as a paralegal? Wasn't their interest during their gap year? Should they continue to seek work as a paralegal? So you don't need to say when you're a paralegal, if you're applying to law school, you don't need to say what type of paralegal you were. So a lot of times people that want to go into corporate law have experience working in companies, but just working as a paralegal, you wouldn't need to say what kind of paralegal you are. And then if you want to get into corporate law, most corporate law, you're doing work on behalf of companies. So companies, when they hire attorneys, they want the ones who went to the best law schools. When firms that hire corporate attorneys to do M&A, they want people that went to the best law schools that did the best in them. So my advice would be get into the best law school you can and do as well as you possibly can there, and then get into the best law firm you can. That's pretty much it. But you have to do well in law school to get into, let's see. Okay, this is another question. Is it too late in your career to apply for a clerkship, and would it be a benefit? So a lot of people apply for clerkships and do them later in their career. It's okay if you have a few years of experience to go to a district court or an appellate clerkship. It's okay. It's the problem with doing a clerkship when you're a few years out of school that wouldn't necessarily benefit you and the reason it's not a benefit is that being a clerk is not the same as practicing law. You're in an authoritative position, you're writing opinions, you're comparing different briefs and briefing the judge on what they should do, you're sitting in court. So it's not the same as practicing law. And so it's almost, once people become law professors, it's very difficult for them to transition back into working in a law firm. And once you do a clerkship, it's the same thing. Once people become judges, it's very difficult for them to transition back. So I recommend most of the time, it's not going to benefit you very much to go do a clerkship later in your career, but it's something you can do. And a lot of times people do them because they are interested in it. And so that can be helpful, but I don't think it's something unless that really benefits you. It's an academic type position when you do it later in your career. When you do it early in your career, it's just something you can do and you have a good experience and that's it. But when you do it later in your career, it doesn't benefit you as much. Okay. Thanks for all these great questions, by the way. It's awesome. Yeah, because of the competitiveness and number of competent people, generally our firms in larger cities more tempted to consider candidates in the area out of state candidates. In addition to looking at smaller markets and continuing to apply other strategies job seekers can use to apply to different geographic areas. So a lot of times I work with people all the time that are trying to move markets, and moving markets can be very difficult and for a lot of reasons. And I'll start talking about that in a second. You should always try to look at firms in the state where you're barred first and leave it at that. There are some circumstances where law firms, generally are firms in larger cities tend to consider candidates in the area. Yes, so law firms are more likely to consider people that are in the area as opposed to out-of-state candidates. There's some exceptions that I'll talk about. In addition to looking at smaller markets and continue to apply their strategies, job seekers can use to apply to different geographic areas. Okay, so one of the things about applying to positions in different states and so forth is law firms, and this is a very important thing, law firms always people that are trying to come home. So what does that mean? I'll just tell you, trying to come home. So if you grew up, for example, let's say you grew up in Joliet, Illinois, which is something to come home. So say you grew up in a city, Joliet, Illinois. I don't even know how you spell it, Joliet. I think that's where the prison is. But say you grew up in Joliet, Illinois, and you were working in New York. Law firms love it when people are coming home. So they love it when people are coming home because they're more likely to stay. And because those people are more likely to stay at the firm, and not only are they more likely to stay, but they're less suspect, meaning the law firms are less suspicious because you're more likely to stay there, you're more likely to be coming because you want to be home than because of switching firms, because of issues with your work and that sort of thing. So law firms love it when people are trying to come home. It can be very beneficial. But yeah, law firms in larger cities are more tempted to consider people there than out-of-state candidates, unless it's where a practice area or something along those lines. They're definitely much more likely to be interested in you if you're there over out-of-state candidates. The problem with out-of-state candidates a lot of times is they have to pass the bar. They have to have a certain type of, law firm may have to pay for them to move there. If they have to pass the bar, then there's time they have to take off to do that. So there are some issues with that. Will this be posted online with Q&A included? Yeah, so the Q&A is always posted online. It takes a few weeks because it's a lot to go through. And the resume, someone asked a question about last week's webinar about the resume review. That'll be going on. It's a long webinar, so that'll be going on online shortly. What should you do if you apply if you've only had 1 year of labor law, but the current state doesn't support it? Then you did 5 years of document review and 1 year of civil litigation work. You've been out of school for 7 years. You graduated from an Ivy League law school. Okay, so this is a very common type thing. A lot of times people will take the path you've taken. It's very common. So if you did 5 years of doc review, that can just qualify you to be an e-discovery attorney many times. So those are very in demand. And then civil litigation defense work. So what I would personally do, and this is a question that I would answer for you, or that I would recommend doing, is anytime you get senior, it becomes more and more difficult to get a job with a law firm. So the problem, the more experience you have, even if you had 7 years of experience doing union side labor law, it would be very difficult for you to get a position doing labor law because you've been out for 7 years. You only did it for 1 year. So my advice to you would be either to apply to positions for e-discovery or, frankly, to start your own firm. So if you start your own firm, you figure out what you want to do and then you do it. I know people all the time. I know a guy that went to NYU for law school, then sold insurance for 10 years, and then started a law firm, became very successful, suing school districts for accommodations for people that weren't getting them or something. I know all sorts of people that have started their own firm. I know people that have started their own firm and trust in the states. I know a guy that did that and was doing it for 2 years and was so successful, he bought a $5 million house. You start your own, and I don't know what he did to earn all this money. It doesn't really matter to me. But starting your own firm is a huge thing you can do. That very few people think about doing this. And starting your own firm is a very smart thing to do. You can read legal magazines and things and learn about practice areas to start. But that's what I would recommend. If you want to stick with the practice of law, then do that. Now, my other piece of advice to you, which you're not going to, would be that it might actually be smart for you to try something that's completely different from practicing law. Because if you're not having a lot of luck with the practice of law, and that's why you're doing doc review, then why continue to do it? If you're smart enough to get into an Ivy League school, you're smart enough to do a lot of other things. Most people that are smart enough to get into an Ivy League school are smart enough to be professors in almost every college or to do all sorts of things. So I don't think it makes sense of sticking with a practice of law if you're not having a lot of success with it or not enjoying it. You have to do something that you enjoy and not be wed to the practice of law when it's not giving you anything. For the longest time, I thought I was going to be a doctor, but I hated science. And I was very good in a couple science classes, but then I started getting into a lot of this other stuff and I realized I hated it. So no. And I probably could have been a doctor, not a great one, and not have gone to a good medical school, but I could have done it and I didn't. But sometimes you go into things where it may not actually interest you. You can get into Harvard Law School if you're incredible grades and LSAT scores, but it doesn't mean you're going to enjoy being a lawyer. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, would just try something maybe different or to start your own firm. You don't want to try to get into a law firm because they're going to play all sorts of games with your experience level. Why were you doing document review and so forth? It's just not worth it. I don't think. Let me see. Okay, this is a good question. I'm sorry I didn't answer this one earlier. This is a good one. And then I think we're almost done. What should you do? Sorry. Considering the increasing emphasis on diversity and inclusion in the legal profession, could you discuss how firms incorporate this into hiring criteria? Are there specific job postings that are designed to attract attorneys from diverse backgrounds and experiences? No. So law firms won't say we're seeking diversity and so forth. I mean, maybe they will. I haven't seen it in their applications. They'll make policy statements saying we support diversity and are equal opportunity employer, all those sorts of things. But they typically don't incorporate that into their job postings. Now, how do firms incorporate that in their hiring criteria? The big thing is all law firms are under a lot of pressure to have makeup of attorneys that reflects the same makeup of society, and their clients expect it. And so they will try to hire enough people to have a diversity, meaning, when I say diversity, meaning, I don't know, if the population of African Americans is 6% or what, I don't know what the number is, but 11% of the population, then they want them to have 11% reflect that as well. So but their law firms aren't going to overlook your qualifications to do that, but they're definitely going to there's a lot of competition for the most qualified people where there may not be as much. I don't want to get too far into this, but how do law firms incorporate that into hiring criteria? They are under a lot of pressure to hire the best people that they can in order to have diversity. And so diversity can mean a lot of things. It can mean people with different sexual orientations. It can mean all sorts of things. But yeah, law firms want to have people from diverse backgrounds with the idea that diversity will reflect the overall diversity of society and help the law firm do a better job for its clients. That's how that works. And a lot of law firms are actually given directives that clients will only do business with them if they have that level of diversity. That's important. Okay, so yeah, this will all be posted online. I think that was the final question. And I certainly appreciate everyone being in this webinar today. Next, I'm glad that so many people were interested in this, but I think the next week's will be a lot more interesting. I'll be talking about people that go to a lot of different practice areas we wouldn't expect, like personal injury and all these different things that a lot of the most qualified attorneys do, and the success they experience doing that, the growth they can experience, and as opposed to, and also working in large firms or in companies or all those different things. So I'm going to talk about that next week. And I'm actually pretty excited about this particular webinar next week because I think it will help a lot of people. So if you're on this call next week, I would definitely encourage you to do next week's call because I think there's a lot of very powerful information there. Thanks for being on this call, and I will be back next week. Thanks.